hour, and we'll probably share the webinar on our website. Also, we'll be circulating the slides that Brendan's going to use today. We welcome questions. If you want to just post a question up and I'll collate them and Brendan can answer them as we go through. So also just a little bit about Social Link. If you're interested in this webinar, you may be interested in checking out some of the other learning opportunities that we've got coming up between now and April. Quite a number of different types of things, including funding forum, a 101 advocacy, and a number of other things. So just check out our website. So let's move on now and get on with it. Brendan, I'll hand the session over to you.
Okay, hi everyone. Now I'm just going to share my screen so you can see the presentation. And did that show up for everyone?
I've got it.
So you can see the presentation, all right, Kathy? Okay. I'll just close everything else down I don't need. Okay, so Privacy Act. There you can see the right screen there, can't you? Because it's not showing on mine what I'm displaying. You can see the Privacy Act 2020 start slide.
Yes.
Okay, great. So the Privacy Act 2020. And in particular, what does it mean for IT systems? So, and I'm from an IT background, so there's my take on all of this is what do you need to do with your IT systems to help you comply with the Act and make sure you've got everything in place. So what we're going to run through today is a quick bit of the history of the Act and what's changed in it. There's some main principles of the Act, which when you read the Act, it's one of those nice big long documents. So what I've done is condense that down into some nice, easy to understand terms. So hopefully that will give everyone a good overview of what's actually meant by the Act. And then the stuff around what does it mean for IT systems. So that's, as I said, where my background comes from. A bit of stuff on what you need to do to make sure you've got everything under control, and then at the end we can have some questions. There's a few other parts along the way that would be good to get some feedback on, so we might also have a bit of chat along the way as well. So here we go. It's all about personal information, which is stuff that can identify somebody. So the Privacy Act, it deals with that personal identifiable information. In some countries, they call it, they abbreviate it as PII. So in America, all of their policies relate to personal identifiable information. In our Act, they just call it personal information. Now, this is stuff that can identify particular people. So it includes things like names and phone numbers and email addresses, driver license numbers, all things like that which are unique to people. It doesn't include information in the public domain. So if you have your name as the secretary for a sports club that's advertised on a website, then that is public information, and that's not treated to the same sort of rules because it's out there in public space and people can look it up and find it. So personal information is something that's been growing more and more as we use the internet, and in the last few years there's been a lot of growth in the amount of information that is out there. It's important to protect this personal information because people have realized how valuable it is to collect and sell for either marketing purposes or to be exploited by criminals to stalk people or steal identities. So it's important that there are some protections around all the personal information that we have that's now out there all over the internet. The original Act came in 1993. Now, it was quite interesting when I was talking to people around the Privacy Act 2020, which got quite a bit of publicity at the end of last year, which was a good thing. But not many people actually realised what was in the original Act. So it's actually been around for some time. And most of the principles in it are still the same as what they were originally. So it's good that there's been some publicity around the update to it, because it's making people actually realise what was already in place. So the original Act was good for its day, but back in '93, the internet was still in its infancy, and there was only about 1% of communication done via email. And they couldn't really imagine back then the sorts of things that we're doing today. It was a very sort of localised and New Zealand focused Act, which didn't have a lot of provisions for international transmissions and some of the things that are happening today in the global sense. So it was a good starting point, and it was good in its day, but it's really sort of been outgrown now and had needed to be updated. So the update had been worked on for some time by the politicians, and it finally came into Act at the end of last year. They revised the document format and style, supposedly to make it easier to read. I've actually tried reading it, and it's still quite a big, long, lengthy legal type document. But we've got some good summaries of things coming up. They updated the way that all the international stuff works. So that was one of the things that they couldn't really do on the old Act, was to enforce any of the overseas companies that were operating in New Zealand. And when it came down to it, they would just say, oh, well, our head office is in another country, so we don't have to comply with your laws. And there wasn't anything our government could do about it. So they've updated it to take into account the way that things work these days, with overseas companies having offices in here and people here sending information overseas. The original Act had some good policies in it, but there was no way of enforcing them. So there are now compliance rules and ways of enforcing things, and fines that can be given out for people who don't do things correctly. So before, if you weren't following the Privacy Act, well, no one could really do anything. Now you can actually have enforcement notices served on you and be told that you have to do what you're supposed to do. So in the Act itself, there are a series of principles which everything is based on. The rest of the Act has a lot of other information around how to do things and some more details, but there's now 13 basic principles, and they show you what you're supposed to do with regard to personal information. So we're going to run through these 13 principles, and this is the part where you read the Act, and it can be quite wordy, but when you boil it down, it's actually quite easy to explain what the principles mean. So we're going to run through these. So principle 1 is about collecting information, and you can only collect personal information if you really need it. So you must have a necessary lawful purpose connected to the activities of your organisation that you need to collect the information for. So you need to know what you're going to do with the information, and you need to know what information you need, and you don't just collect all the information that you can possibly do. It's really making sure that you're not getting any extra information that you don't really need. In some cases, people might be trying to fill out surveys and collect a whole lot of data, but if they don't need it, then they shouldn't be collecting it. The second principle around the source of the information, to get it directly from the person concerned wherever possible. So if you collect it from the person who the information is about, then that means that they can control the information and the accuracy of it, and it also means that they know that it's being collected about them. If you're collecting information from third parties, then you should really get consent from the person you're collecting it about. So some of the cases when that happens is when you're getting references about people. So you might want to talk to somebody else to get a reference on someone, whether that's, you think of not just employment references, but when you're getting rentals and things like that, people quite often want to talk to people that you were previously dealing with to get references. You should get their consent before you go and collect that information about them. And the third principle there, telling people what you're going to do with their information. So why is it being collected? Who will see it? Is it compulsory or voluntary to give them the information? And what would happen if you don't provide them the information? Now, a lot of this gets covered in privacy statements. So quite often when you're filling out anything online, there'll be a privacy statement that says what you're having the information collected for and what's going to happen with it. Now, some of these also get very lengthy and wordy, and people just tend to click on the I agree box and keep on going. There is some useful tools online from the New Zealand privacy organisation to help generate those things, and I'll show you some more about that later. The fourth one is the manner in which you collect information. So you need to be fair and not intrusive. So you can't be threatening or coercive or misleading when you're collecting information from people. You also need to take care when collecting information from children, as it may not be fair to treat them the same way as you treat adults. So principle 4 is all about how you collect the information and being nice about it and not doing it in an underhand way. Number 5 is the storage and security of the information. So you must keep it safe and have reasonable safeguards in place to prevent it from being lost or misused or accidentally disclosed. Now, that's the one that really comes into play when looking at IT systems, because that's where you tend to store most of your information, and you need to have robust systems to make sure nobody can hack into them and get them, but you also need to make sure you've got the right policies and procedures in place that people don't accidentally send out data to the wrong people. So that's the main principle that we'll look at later on when we start talking more about the IT systems. Number 6 is around access. So if people want to know what information you have on them, then they have a right to that. And if they request that from you, then you have to give it to them, as long as it doesn't pose a threat or breach somebody else's privacy. So there, in most of these principles, there's a guiding principle, but there's also exceptions, and there's occasions when you wouldn't have to follow the actual rules. So in that one, if there's information that you have which contains information about other people as well, then it may not be appropriate to disclose that. Examples of that, you could have, say, a list of jurors on a court case, and it may not be appropriate to hand that out to people requesting that information that's held about them on the court case, because they might try and get in contact with the jury and try and influence someone. So there's times when it's not appropriate to give out information, and there's some guidelines in that on some of the tools online as to what is appropriate and what isn't. Number 7 is correcting the information if it's wrong. So if you hold some information on somebody and it's out of date, and they ask you to update it, then you should do that. So the most common one for this is somebody's changed their address, so the contact details you have for them in your database may not be correct anymore, and if they ask you to update that, then you should do that. There is also a process that if you ask someone to update information and they think what they have is already correct, then you can ask them to put a statement of correction next to the information. So you can tell them what you think it should be, and they can attach that to the information. So it's got their version and your version. So if there's any disputes in the future, you can see that you had actually told them what you thought it should be. But that's part of keeping information up to date and making sure that it's accurate, which leads into the next principle, making sure that the information is correct before you use it. So it needs to be up to date and not misleading. Once again, addresses in the database. If you're going to send out a newsletter to everyone, have you got the correct addresses, or are you sending a newsletter to somebody by mistake because the address is wrong? When you have all this information, it comes to a point where you may not need it any longer. Principle 9 looks at how long you need to keep it. So how long do you need to keep it for the purpose that you first collected it for? So once you're finished with the information and you don't need it anymore, then you should get rid of it. But in some cases, there's other lawful needs to keep information for longer periods. So things like the Employment Relations Act, it has a 6-year period where you have to keep wage records for. So you need to make sure when you're going to dispose of records and information that you're not actually conflicting anything else that has requirements and other acts. So number 10 limits the use of personal information. When you collect the information, you should have a purpose that you're collecting it for, which is right back in the first principle. And you should only use the information for that purpose. If you want to use it for anything else that was not stated when you first collected it, then you should get permission from the person to use their information for that. So sometimes you might have a whole lot of information and it was collected for one reason, and then you think of something else that you could use it for. If that wasn't part of the original privacy policy, then you should get permission before you use the information for that secondary use. The limits of disclosure, you should only disclose information if you have a valid reason to. So was disclosing information part of your original privacy policy? Did you state on that you were going to disclose it to other people once you had got it? If you didn't, then you need to get authorization before disclosing it. So you can't just hand out information that you have on people to other organizations or other agencies without permission. Principle 12, so this is the new one that they introduced to help safeguard the New Zealand information against overseas companies. So you can now only disclose information overseas if they have similar protection laws in their country, or if they agree to adequately protect it, or if you get permission from the person concerned. So a lot of these things you can get around the principles as long as you have permission to do so. The principles are what you should be doing as a baseline for everything. So this principle not only applies to information that we hold that we need to disclose to overseas companies, but also make sure that overseas companies doing business in New Zealand will follow our rules as well. And the last one there is about unique identifiers. So a lot of people will assign unique identifiers to people when they collect information. There's some rules around only applying that when it's needed. So unique identifiers, things like driver's license number or a student ID number, or it could be a number, a reference number in the CRM that's been attached to customer details as a short lookup. You cannot assign a unique identifier if it's already been given to that person by another agency. So it stops people from being able to use other identifiers and then be able to look up information quickly in other systems. So you only use those unique identifiers when it's appropriate to do so. So that's the brief summary of the Act. It's a fairly wordy document, so hopefully that's helped it make sense without having to read the whole thing. There are some general recommendations that I would have for every organisation. Understand the Act. So there is some really good information at privacy.org.nz. So there's a lot of online training. There's a privacy policy generator. There's a breach notification tool. There's places where you can ask them questions. And you can actually sign up and get regular fortnightly newsletter updates from them as well. So that's a really handy place to go to. You should have a privacy officer. So that's somebody within your organisation who's responsible for knowing all of this stuff and making sure that you get it right. So somebody should take ownership of making sure you've got all your privacy policies correct. And it's good to appoint somebody as a privacy officer, just like you'd appoint somebody as a health and safety officer. So you need to have robust systems in place. And this is your IT systems that hold your data. So they need to be safe and secure. They need to be backed up and running reliably. And we'll have a bit more on that in the second half. So reviewing your policies and procedures is a big part of making sure you get this right. There's internal policies that you should have on how you handle personal information, where you store it, when you dispose of it and how you do that. And there's external policies that you have as well, which is your privacy policies when collecting information, which make sure everyone knows what you're collecting it for and what you're going to use it for. Once you have all these policies and procedures, you need to make sure everyone knows about them, and staff and volunteers and everyone else in your organisation know what they do, know what they need to do. So it's not much good having a policy that sits in a document on a shelf somewhere. You actually need to make sure people understand it and follow it as well. So how does everyone think they're doing at the moment in their organisations? Do you know what personal information you collect and store and use in your organisation? Do you know what policies you have in place for how you collect and store and use that information? When you look at what you do, is there parts of this that are sending off warning bells to you, or are you sitting there going, oh yes, we've got all this under control? So that's just a bit of a check-in time for everyone to see what they've thought about from those principles and how they apply to your own organisation.
So I've just allowed everybody to talk if they want to talk. I think it'll work.
Yeah.
Oh, hang on a minute, hold the line.
I think they'll just need to unmute themselves.
Yes.
So
I've asked them.
Anyone have any thoughts on how you're doing yourselves?
Maybe they can't talk.
Hi, Maureen here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. So just to respond to that, I think, we're pretty good in terms of policy, strict policies in terms of privacy and collection of information, and that good time to go and probably review them. But I don't know who my privacy officer is, so that's something for me to find out.
Yeah, and that's good. And that's, I think, what a lot of people will have is some general policies in place, but not sure how old they are or how appropriate they are for how we currently work. So it's a good prompt to go and review those things and make sure they are up to date and accurate and appropriate.
And that's what I've just made a note to bring it up in our team meeting, and give that responsibility to somebody. I hope it's not me. So
Okay, so we'll keep on moving then.
oh, hang on a minute. There's a
Oh,
question.
just
Oh, sorry. Yep.
anyone
Go for
else?
it. No, that's fine.
We've got some other chat things we might do at the end too, Kathy, which we might just be able to do by opening up the chat.
Yep.
And get people just to type in, but we'll, yeah, that's at the end of the next one. So the next half of this presentation is around what does it mean for IT systems. So with IT systems, it's all about the data, right? How you store, protect, and access your data. Personal information is part of the overall set of data that you have in your systems, and it needs to be well protected, just like all the other data that you have as well. So you need to be able to access the data and use it when you want to. Under the Act, you also need to be able to respond to requests from people about their own information. So if somebody makes a request to you for all the information that you hold on them, you need to be able to easily look that up and get that back to them. So that's important to be able to access your data. You need to ensure it hasn't been altered in any way. So when you go to use your data, you want to make sure it was the same, it is the same as what it was when you first collected and stored it. So sometimes data can be tampered with maliciously through people changing things without authorization, or it could be corrupted through systems that have faults with them, or hard drives getting corrupted. You need to have suitable processes around your archiving and deleting. So you need to keep it intact for as long as you need it, but then once you've finished with it, you also need to have secure disposal methods. There's various ways that you can delete files from systems. Some of them actually get rid of them completely. Some of them still leave traces behind that can be recovered from. And that's one of the things to be aware of, especially if you're have an old PC that's no longer used, but it had a whole lot of data stored on it, and you give that away or dispose of it. Is it possible for someone to get that hard drive and actually get all the information off it? And one of the big things around your IT systems is you need to make sure you don't have a breach of your data, particularly in this case, personal information, because if you have a breach of personal information, then you must notify the person who lost the information, and also the Privacy Commissioner. And that's one of the new rules, that if you don't notify those people after having a severe breach, then you can be fined. You don't get fined for the breach, you just get fined for not notifying people. It'll be interesting to see in the next year or two how much we see in the press around privacy breaches that are now being notified. In the past, it was possible for people to have those types of things happen and not tell anyone about them. That's all now changed, so it'll be interesting to see how much we see. So when looking at data security, there's three main pillars that I use to make sure it's all right. So confidentiality, making sure it can only be accessed by authorized people. So that covers all manner of things, from people being able to hack in and see what you've got saved on your systems, through to things like having a laptop stolen out of the back of a car and then somebody being able to turn it on and access stuff that's on it. So there's a lot of risks around confidentiality. Integrity, it's the making sure that it's the same now as what it was when it was saved. and the availability, so making sure you can access it whenever you need to. So the CIA, as I like to refer it to, all of the risks tend to fall into one of those categories, and that's the way that I use when I'm looking at things in IT systems, to try and identify areas that could go wrong. Will it have any impact on the confidentiality, the integrity, or the availability of it? So what do you need to do in your organization around all of this? So privacy impact assessment, so often referred to as a PIA. So this is a tool that you can use to identify and assess any privacy risks. It's useful when looking at new systems or making changes to processes. And the privacy.org.nz website has an online PIA toolkit that you can use to help do these sorts of things. So it's a set of steps that you work through and work out what information that you're collecting, what impact it will have on your privacy policies, and if there's any risks that you need to take care of. With risks, and there is the overall IT risk management for your organization, and the personal information will be a subset of that. So it's part of your overall data, and it'll be subject to all the same sorts of risks that you would have for all of your IT systems. So it's really important for organizations to actually know what their risks are so they can manage them. And that's a really useful exercise to go through, especially from a governance level. If you're involved in running an organization and part of a board, then part of your due diligence would be to know and understand the risks and be able to make informed decisions on which ones you need to put some mitigation steps in for and which ones are acceptable risks. So mitigation steps, if you do find risks that the organisation has which are not acceptable, then you need to make some steps to change some things and make it right. So you need to know what the steps are to lower the risks, and then have plans in place to actually implement those and get the organisation to a better place. And documentation, it's quite often the forgotten step in all of this. It's not just good enough to know what you are doing, but you also need to document it as evidence of what you've done. If you go through a risk assessment process and you decide you've got a whole lot of risks, and then decide some of them are low enough that you can accept that, then you should have that documented somewhere, so it can be shown at a later stage that yes, you recognise this risk, but you made the decision that nothing needed to be done to it, or you recognise the risk and these are the steps that you were taking to lower the risk. So that's an important step that quite often gets forgotten about, but it is good to have the evidence of what you've done. So the mandatory privacy breach. This is one of the big changes, as I mentioned, in the new Act. This is part of the enforcement and the notification to people is what they enforce, not the actual fining people for having a breach. So if your personal information is accessed by somebody else, then you need to notify the Privacy Commissioner and the people affected. And this is probably the biggest thing for IT systems and the use of them. And this is where, Kathy, we might open up the chat again to see what people think can cause a data breach. I've got a whole lot of reasons, but if anyone has any thoughts on things that they may have seen or experienced.
Do you want people to chat?
If people type
And
things
use the chat, yeah.
Chat, yeah.
Okay, go. I guess from my perspective, yeah, system hacking, and that's lack of antivirus. I should have put in the chat, shouldn't I?
Okay, so I'm not sure if I can actually see all the chats coming up at the moment. So some of the things that can cause this, password. So if you, oh, here we go. Now I've got can see the chat there. So system hacking, yeah, that's a good one. Lack of antivirus, yeah. Clicking unsecure links and opening spam email. Social engineering, yeah. So those are all good examples of cyber criminals trying to get access and hacking into things, which is, yeah, a big issue these days. Cybercrime has been one of the growth industries in the last 10 years, unfortunately. And it's opened up a huge new avenue for criminals to reach right around the world and be able to steal data and on-sell it and do all sorts of nasty things.
Did you get the ones in the Q&A session too?
Oh, yep, there we go, Q&A. Weak passwords, yep, there we go. So weak passwords is a very common one, or sharing passwords. Some of the other things, yeah, hackers, that's good, everybody knows about that. Having things stolen, so laptop or a phone stolen. Everybody knows how easy it is to lose phones these days. What if your phone actually has copies of data or a saved password to access a system that you use that somebody else can then log into? Email sent to the wrong person. This happens all the time, where somebody will have an email and either Outlook will be very helpful and decide that it knows who you want to send it to and select the wrong person, or you've just somehow managed to click on the wrong one. Now, if that email has an attachment in it that has data, then you've got the risk of actually sending that information out to somebody, and that does happen. That's actually quite a common occurrence. USB sticks, they're very handy things to have to copy data to when you need to move it around or do something with it, but they're also very insecure. And what happens if you need to copy some files for somebody and you put a copy of a spreadsheet with data about that contains personal information onto a USB stick, and then you forget about it and you don't delete it from that, and then you might take it home and leave it lying around on your desk, and then one of the children may need to copy some files to it from the computer at home to take to school for an assignment. Pick up the USB stick. Next thing you know, there's a spreadsheet with personal information on sitting in the middle of a classroom. So those sort of scenarios can happen quite easily. Malware, so that's all the cybercrime that we were just talking about. Files stored without appropriate security. So internally, you should have some structured filing security. So if there's personal data like all the employment contracts and HR stuff, then that can't be accessed by other people. So it's making sure that you protect files with the right security rights. Software that can do that sort of thing. You may be storing all of your stuff in the cloud, and that cloud provider gets compromised. So that's a little bit beyond your control, but it does mean that when you are deciding who to use for these types of things, you should do a privacy impact assessment and make sure that when you're choosing a provider, they're a reputable one that's got some good background and experience, and they know what they're doing and are less likely to be compromised themselves. Pieces of paper that end up in the wrong hands. When you've got copies of data that are on paper and they just get thrown in the bin at the end and then tipped out with the rest of the rubbish, you can quite often end up with information that could end up in the wrong place. So it's important to securely dispose of things, not just in the digital format, but also hard copies getting shredded or going to a secure disposal. And people, one of the biggest storage of all of this information is in people's heads. And if they talk about information that they're not supposed to be talking about and disclosing confidential details about people, then that can be an issue as well. So there's ways that you can prevent data breaches. There's password policies that you can have to make passwords more secure. There's the firewalls, user training to stop people getting caught by cyber criminals and clicking on the wrong things. You can have mobile device policies to control how they get left, and having things like saying that you should not leave laptops in back seats of cars and things. And you can also encrypt devices, so if they do get stolen, people can't access what's on them. You can check emails before sending them, making sure you delete files and use passwords or encrypt USB drives, having antivirus and user training, having the right storage policies, using approved software and using reliable providers, locking all your filing cabinets, and having all the right policies in place. So that's the presentation. The summary of all of that is to be careful with personal information. Know what you're collecting, know why you're collecting it, and treat it in the right way. Understand your IT risks and make sure that your systems will protect your data. Have the right policies in place, and ensure everybody knows what the policies are, and do whatever you can to avoid having a data breach. I see there's a few questions up there. How do they know you have not notified, to be able to fine you for not notifying? That's a good question. I suppose there will still be some people who may try to hide the things when they've happened like that. It's the Privacy Commissioner who is in charge of all of that. So there's some more information around how the Privacy Commissioner works on that privacy.org website, but it's a government agency that's in charge of all the privacy that actually do all that. The way that the fines work for things like compliance, the Privacy Commissioner can issue notices, and if they don't get complied with, then it gets raised to the Human Rights Tribunal, and they are the ones who actually lay the charges against people. So the new Privacy Act 2020 actually lays out the procedure for the government departments to be able to do that and what steps they need to take. So it ends up as a human rights type of issue, and that's the where the actual fines come from.
It may not be a case though of being dishonest about it. It might just be a case of not saying anything.
Yeah,
So-
and that's one of the problems with data breaches is actually knowing it has happened in the first place. So there's been some recent cases that have been in the press in the last few months, and some of them dated back to breaches that actually happened 12 or 18 months ago. People managed to hack into systems and get access to things, and nobody knew, and they've been sitting there collecting data for quite some time. And you can't notify anyone if you don't know yourself. So that's one of the other things around the IT risks, is having systems that prevent data breaches, but also having reporting available that can tell you if you have had a breach. Sometimes you won't know until somebody tells you, because they find your data somewhere else. And there's been cases like that where information's been left lying around and it's been picked up, or and then somebody goes to the press and says, well, I just found all this information somewhere, and they didn't know it had been breached until they were actually told by somebody externally. So coming up to 11 o'clock now. So is there any other questions people have? So there is some things that I do with the things that I've got that can help people with all of this. So I have sort of separated this into three sort of ways that I can help people. There's the do-it-yourself way, where there's some information and template toolkits that I have that people can use, and then they fill out the templates themselves to do things like risk assessments and risk treatment plans, and have all of that documentation done. For those that need a hand to do all that, then there's the do it with you format, where we use all the templates and the toolkits, and I help people through that and step them through. And then that's the do it for you one, when if people don't have the time or the ability to do it, then I can do it for them. So for a lot of people, the do it yourself option is great, because you can do that in your own time, and you just need the templates and the toolkits and the pointing in the right direction to know what to do. And there are my contact details. So that's it from me. As Kathy said, you'll get a copy of the presentation.
So Brendan, there's a couple more questions and comments there now too. People are waking up.
Oh yes, in the chat line. What if you record information and you notify but no changes are made?
So that's if Social Link, as an example, had put information about this particular organisation on their database, and they notified us that that's not correct, and we still didn't make any changes.
Yeah. So if you don't update the information, then there is what's called, and if I go back to correcting Principle 7, correcting personal information that's wrong. So you can ask people to attach a statement of correction. So that will, you can tell people what you think the information is, and they should attach that to the information. If you request it and people don't change it, and they still keep sending things out to the wrong people, then you can notify the Privacy Commissioner and lodge a complaint with them. They can then issue enforcement notices. So there is a process, and once again on that, the website, the privacy.org.nz, there's ways there that it can help people step through the ways of notifying the Privacy Commissioner that somebody is not following a principle, that they haven't been updating information even though you've requested it. They can then issue that statement of compliance to tell them that they need to comply. If they still don't comply with that, then it gets raised to the Human Rights Commission, and Human Rights Commission will fine. So there are processes in place to notify that it needs to be updated, and then if they don't do that, then you can notify the Privacy Commissioner and have them raise the big stick and tell people that they have to do it. Most privacy policy information, most of privacy and policy information are written so much and people feel lazy to read. Isn't that one of those things we could share?
Be. Yes, because it is boring. Sorry.
Yeah. Yes, privacy policies, and I'm sure that some of them, especially when you look at some of these online places that you sign up to, they have pages and pages of user agreements that you're supposed to read, and then the box, they bury down inside all of those things that they will share their data with all the other things. And you've seen this in some of the media lately where Facebook are now saying that some of the other companies that they own will now start sharing your information with Facebook. So they're actually changing their rules after you've signed up to it anyway. A privacy policy doesn't need to be long and complicated, and certainly for organisations creating their own privacy policy, it should be something that's easy to read. And the privacy.org.nz actually has a policy generator, which is actually a really handy tool. It's got a cool name. If I just...
Yes, I had a look at that the other day, actually. It's really easy.
But yeah, it should be nice and concise and easy for people to follow. The ones that are pages and pages long are normally because they're doing all sorts of things that you don't want them to do. But at the end of the day, if they run on the thought that if you want to use that application, you'll tick the box and say yes. And that's unfortunately the thing that you need to work out yourself is if you're, especially these overseas companies that say that they will share their data with other companies because that's how they work, do you want to deal with those types of companies? I'm looking at Facebook in particular with that. Okay, so is there any other questions people have?
Looks like we're done.
Okay. Oh, thanks everyone for attending. I hope that's been of some use to you all. It's not a glamorous topic to have to learn about and talk about, but it is something that is important to do. And with the new Act, it's important to know the updates and how it affects your organisation, and yeah, making sure that you're not breaching everything and treating people's information with the respect it deserves. So
great. That's excellent. Thanks, Brendan. It looks like people have appreciated the information that you've given us all. So as we said before, we'll circulate the slides, and which will also have Brendan's website details on, and I think you'll email some information about the templates and stuff, that the extras that are available. I'm interested in the templates, I have to say.
Yes.
So
Yep.
thanks for coming, everybody. Sorry about the beginning bit, but that's all good. It went quite well. Oh, okay. So thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you later. And
Okay.
thanks, Brendan. Bye. Right.